My name is Margie Dorhorst. I am a consulting teacher for the Responsive Classroom Approach. I also work on the programs team as an instructional and curriculum designer, and I have a passion for educational leadership. My background was as an elementary principal for 16 years and in a school that for 20 years put Responsive Classroom in place with a diverse school community. This leadership webinar is designed for you, whatever role you have as a leader in your school, whether you're an administrator, a teacher leader at a district level, this is designed for you. And the interesting part, this is designed for you in the moment right now. We're in this unprecedented time right now. It's hard to even imagine, where no one expected somewhere in the middle of March that school would be closed around the world for an unprecedented amount of time, actually an unknown amount of time right now. And as we jumped into that world of remote school, it's really made some changes to how we work as leaders and also provided some opportunities. We're going to talk a little bit about both of those today. I'm live to you right now from my dining room in central Wisconsin. It is rural Wisconsin. So if you know anything about rural internet, sometimes it gets a little shaky. So if I pause or go out for a minute, just stay with me. Hopefully I'll be coming back in soon and we continue as I actually had the tech come out today and double my speed. So hopefully that's a little bit better. I am going to now unshare my screen so you can see a little bit more of me, I guess it would be stop share. Look at that group of amazing people. So now I'm going to just walk you through the Zoom screen. As we do this webinar today with all of us around the country, around the world, hopefully, we have a way that we're presenting content for Responsive Classroom. This isn't the typical way we spend content. If you know anything about the Responsive Classroom approach, we build community and we work with people in a community format modeling the Responsive Classroom approach. Right now, to be honest, this is the Responsive Classroom approach in classrooms around the country, actually around the world. So our goal today is to use the format of Zoom, much the same way that we would do an in-person workshop. So we will be doing breakout groups, and depending upon the size of the groups, we'll give you some direction on how to do some of those activities as well. But the best learning happens when you can connect with other people. I'm just going to walk you through your Zoom screen right now. On the bottom left-hand corner is probably where most of you are. There is that mute button. Again, it should look like this. If you click on it, then the little microphone will either turn white or green. And when you're in your breakout groups, you'll need to have it be on green. If you're not muted when you're in here, we can pretty much everybody hear you. The stop video, if you click on that, it'll turn either to a black screen with your name or if you have a cute little picture. Sometimes people feel comfortable being in the stop video when you're in a class or in a webinar. Feel free to do that because we're just going to be thumbnails a lot of the time anyway. We're in the share screen. But I'm going to ask that when you go to the breakout rooms to make sure we can see your face because that's the most connected we can be in that time. You also have a chat button. It looks like a speaker bulb on the bottom there. When you click on the chat, a chat box will form on the side. And when you click on that chat, you can type something into there that we can all see. And I see some people are doing this already, so I'm hoping other people will do it as well. I want to see how far reaching this webinar goes. So for those of you that already shared, you're from Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Kansas, and looks like Connecticut. Please just put in where you're from and we can see that grow. This will be part of the recording. So at the end, you can see where everyone's from. Boy, I can't read as fast as all of you can type. I do see I have another Wisconsin person there, though. I did recognize Madison, Wisconsin. And another Madison, Wisconsin. So the challenges of Zoom hopefully are balanced with the advantages of Zoom. Isn't that fun to see? Oh my gosh, even up north, Rhinelander, Wisconsin. We had somebody the other day from South Africa. It's like, oh my goodness, we can reach the world. Well, welcome all of you. And the interesting thing is we're from all over and we're pretty much all in the same boat right now when it comes to our schools, which is a frustrating and challenging opportunity that we have right now. I'm going to go back to share screen. And I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint that I'm using today. see if I can get it back up. There we go. The PowerPoint I'm using today, some people at the end of a day will get frustrated because they wish they could have a copy of the PowerPoint or a copy of the handouts. The PowerPoint is copyrighted, so you can't actually have a copy of the screen or the parts that are on here. But we will make a recording of this, so you actually will get a recording of the webinar if you so choose. The other thing, I'll be referencing materials that are available through the Responsive Classroom website. So if you go to responsiveclassroom.org, much of what I'm referencing is either a free resource on that site, and we also have a bookstore. So if I'm using a approach that's there, you'll be able to know which books or texts that I'm doing that with as well. So as we get started today and we look at that title, Empowering Students with Social and Emotional Skills Using the Responsive Classroom Approach. Depending upon where you are in your learning of responsive classroom, this might be the first time you're learning about it in this webinar, or you might be a person that's already implementing responsive classroom at a high level, and you might be anywhere in between. This webinar is for all of you. And the beauty of this work is we can take all of our experiences and make some personal connections to this as well. That's also the exciting part about breakout sessions is when you get into the breakout rooms, you'll get a chance to hear and learn from leaders in a lot of different roles all over the place that can help us. It's interesting as we started this work, and I heard from another educator who said that it was very hard in May to keep their students motivated. And it's hard, I remember as a principal, it was hard enough to keep them motivated in May, nonetheless right now. So this educator said that she's really been struggling because her own son, who's a student, says, I don't have to do any work, school is closed. And she made an interesting comment. She said, hey buddy, school isn't closed, the building is closed. School is still open. So we're going to talk about that today when we talk about school. I'm going to talk about remote school because that's what probably all of us are in right now. And I'm going to talk about when we go back in school. And again, we don't know the situation of how that's going to be, but I want you to look at it with both lenses. I remember as a school leader that May was a time that I was trying to keep the learning going the best that I could through the end of the school year. And at the same time, I was already thinking ahead to the next school year. So you're going to kind of operate with those two lenses. How can I use this information now to sustain learning the best that I can through this end of this remote learning year? And then also, how can I use this information to make whatever setting we're in the fall or when we return to school, be as positive as possible with the goal of focusing on social emotional learning. These are our goals for today in our workshop. Oh, and so my screen has frozen. So take a look at our learning goals for today in our webinar. We're going to take a deep dive into the responsive classroom approach. We're going to look at the responsive classroom practices that align with the work that we're doing for social emotional learning, things that we can use right away. And again, we're going to look ahead at how we can use things when we can return to school. We're also going to look at how we can use what we're learning today to support our students, but also to support the staff that we work with that can give us some additional tools in our leadership skill toolbox so we can support classrooms and we can also support and transform classrooms in schools. And finally, our last goal is to take time to reflect and think about how this content is going to be helpful in the work that you do right now. And we're going to have some planning conversations with other leaders and educators in this format that we're in as well. So knowing that these are the goals that are set up for the workshop today, I want you to think about what goal you have for this 90 minutes of your valuable time. It made me think of an analogy I had the other day. So often as a principal, I didn't even have a chance to stop and think. I'm often just going in the trenches of what was going on. And I have many colleagues right now that I connect with who are kind of the same thing, like everything's kind of going at the same time. And the analogy somebody made was that to the analogy of the game soccer. Well, I played soccer in intramural sports in college. And when I played soccer, I wasn't very good, but when the ball came to you, you just kicked the ball, and wherever it went, you were hoping it went toward the goal. I feel like right now, how we've been operating schools has just been kicking the ball when it gets thrown to us, and hopefully it hits toward the goal. We're going to stop right now, and we're going to do a strategy that a good soccer player would be. It's called settling the ball. A good soccer player will stop the ball, look down the field, see where the goal is, look for where their opponent is, where their teammates are, and strategically plan to get that ball in the goal. You're going to stop right now and take a minute to settle the ball, thinking about social emotional learning and what you're hoping that these goals will bring to you today. Maybe it's settling the ball for the moment you're in right now, or maybe it's something that you're doing in the future. On your piece of paper that you have, jot down what is the goal you're hoping for in this 90-minute webinar. And I'm going to be silent while you do that to give you some thinking time. In the responsive classroom approach, whether at the elementary level or at the middle school level, hopes, goals, SMART goals are all part of the work that we do. And oftentimes we don't take time to really think of them. I even was talking to a colleague who uses responsive classroom, and she said, wow, we didn't really stop in March to say, what are our goals for learning from now until the end of the year? Part of that was we didn't even know how long that period was going to be. But as we talked, actually I saw this weekend and talked this weekend, we said, you know, at one point our hopes were to maintain learning. And then another time we thought, well, hopefully we can have some new learning, although that didn't seem realistic when everybody couldn't participate. And then finally she said, our goal is to maintain relationships with every child from now until the end of the school year. And she said, now I had teachers who weren't feeling like they had efficacy, but now had a sense of success because they could achieve that goal of maintaining relationships one way or another. To help us achieve our goals, we're going to follow these group guidelines. And if you know anything about responsive classroom approach, we know the importance of rules and guidelines to help set us up for success. It kind of made me think of an example that a teacher just shared about a classroom that the rules and guidelines she had in place in her classroom were working really well until her classroom was on a screen. And once the kids were on a screen, the rules that she had set up to start the year just weren't working. So she had, you know, dogs coming in the screen and brothers and sisters coming in the screen and silly faces and funny glasses. And finally she stopped and said, hey, we have to stop and do just like we did at school. We need to set up some guidelines for how we're going to be in our remote classroom. So one of the guidelines that they came up with is only your face should appear in the screen, so that when something else appeared, and in this case, she had the example of the little girl had cute leggings on and all of a sudden her knees were up by her face. And she said, oh, remember our rule, only our face appears in the screen. Those are great leggings, but I want to just see your face. She took care of sitting up straight. And boy, you sure can kind of guess that if she wouldn't have made that comment reminded of the rules, she would have had more leggings or something colorful show up from everyone else, because everybody needs that need to be significant. So let's go to our group guidelines for today. First of all, again, it's a Zoom format. Take care of your learning and personal needs. You're all in your homes. Many of you are likely not alone. So if you need to take care of something in your home that you're at right now, please do that and move around or take care of what you need. And again, just make sure you stop video. And stop video and mute will make us not hear you or see you. If you just stop video and you're not muted, I guess we can still hear you at the same time, but can't see you. The second guideline is to respect and support others. So again, you're here with over 200 people from around the country. And when you get into those breakout rooms, we still want that sense of building a community of learners in that small group. The groups will be about probably 5 to 10 people, which is kind of small and kind of not. I'm going to ask you when you get into those breakout groups to do what I call a cocktail party introduction. It'll be a brief introduction, but that way we know who you are and where you're from. Just builds a little bit of connection. So of course we probably won't be shaking hands anymore, but if you start, I'm Margie, I'm a consulting teacher from Wisconsin. Quick and brief, but it's a way to build that community. I'm also going to encourage you to respect and support each other by trying your best to be present. Zoom meetings, Zoom trainings, it's really easy to check out. You also have other distractions. The content is here, but again, the value is going to really be in those breakout discussions. Before you go to breakout, I'm going to give you 2 directions, first verbally, and if I have a slide to go with it, you're also going to see the question in print. And I can hear somebody who maybe isn't on mute, so if you've not muted, please do that. Thank you. And also when you're there, hopefully your team can support you in understanding what the question is too, but I'm going to give it to you 2 times so that you're ready. And our last guideline, take care of your learning materials and space. Obviously, you are in your space. So whatever space you have, you're taking care of. And our learning materials, like I said today, just be sure that you're ready with some piece of paper and something to write with. When you leave today, what you jot down on those notes will kind of be your next direction. If you're giving 90 minutes of your valuable time, it's not going to just be to sit and get and listen to what I'm saying, but it's really to have time to reflect and say, okay, now what can I do with this? So those notes will help generate that path forward for you. And we'll take time at the very end of this webinar for you to kind of devolve those notes into something that you can step forward with. You may tuck those notes away and never use them again, but the power of them will give you something that you can use to help clear your vision for what you're doing now and also moving forward with this work. So take a minute, just look at those guidelines and just envision for a minute, if we're following these guidelines in this Zoom format, what might that look like and feel like today when we're in this 90-minute webinar? My goal for this work is to have you feel respected, engaged, and cared for, and also to respect whatever you need to do to give whatever little bit of time you can to this, hopefully keeping you engaged for the whole 90 minutes. If you're familiar with the responsive classroom approach, you might have seen this before, but even if you have, I'm going to have you take a look at this content right now through the eyes of the challenges of empowering students socially, emotionally during this time of remote learning. One of the values of the responsive classroom approach is, first of all, it's been tried and true. It's been around for almost 40 years. The other value of it is based on a strong core belief system. That core belief system, we talk about it being the true north. It literally draws us to every direction that we're headed. The core belief system that drives this work is this. In order for students to be successful, both in school and out of school, they need a set of social and emotional competencies and a set of academic competencies. We know schools are about academic achievement. That's what they're designed for. But the core belief of responsive classroom is academic achievement is only possible for them to have success if they have the social emotional skills and the academic competencies to achieve that success. And I'm going to take it just a bit further. That in addition to that, we believe that that's what they need to be successful, and we see it as our responsibility to teach them that. We're going to dig into the social emotional competencies a little bit more as we work through this today. This is going to be the main content for today. The 5 social emotional competencies that we're focusing on are cooperation, assertiveness, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. Just let those 5 words sink in for a minute and think about all those competencies. What are needed right now for your students to be successful in remote school? It's funny when I think about them, I think, boy, the kids that are being successful have a lot of those competencies. And the ones that are struggling, there's some that are definitely more of a struggle than others. Same thing with the academic competencies, having an academic mindset, perseverance, having learning strategies, and academic behaviors. I'm going to flip that on its head just a little bit more. Think about, I always say it's March 13th because it was Friday the 13th. Give or take a week is when schools around the country closed. Schools around the world closed. And when that happened, in your role as a school leader, you probably had some of your educators that you're responsible for saying, okay, I can do this. I can offer remote learning. you know, I've already got some great ideas. I'm excited to try this. I'll make this work. And you probably also had some educators that said, no way, I hardly even do email. There's no way I can offer this remote learning. That's not why I became a teacher. I don't see myself being able to do this. Whenever that happened, first of all, as a leader, you felt a responsibility to say, yes, I know this is going to be hard. You had empathy for everybody and for yourself, hopefully. But you also had a belief that everybody could be successful. And you anticipated that there'd be some that are going to be more successful and some that are going to be that were going to struggle. But your belief was that everybody was going to be successful to a high degree, that this was going to be the best remote school you possibly could give. So if you think about that belief drove what you did, this belief drives what we do when we interact and plan for students in a responsive classroom approach. So what does that mean for our behaviors as adults? We call those our guiding principles. The 6 guiding principles described below are going to be talked about in this webinar, and then I have 2 more webinars that are going to be coming up as well. Guiding principle number 1 is the one we're going to talk the most about today. Teaching social and emotional skills is as important as teaching academic content. In the responsive classroom approach, it isn't an either or. It isn't the social emotional skill of the week, or social emotional skills get taught in guidance class, or maybe in our social emotional time that we do. It's intertwined and it's part of everything we do. And you're going to learn that's mainly what our 90 minutes are going to be about today. The second one, how we teach is as important as what we teach. So we talk about different learning approaches so that we can help all students learn to the best ability that they can. The third one, the greatest cognitive growth occurs through social interaction. There's a lot of research that supports that, but building that in a school setting or even in a remote setting is really a challenge. And we make that part of what we do in the work that we do. The fourth one, how we work together as adults to create a safe, joyful, and inclusive school environment is as important as our individual contribution or competence. That's one thing I'm hearing from educators has been a real struggle. Teachers miss that day-to-day connection with other educators, that problem solving, that pat on the back, or that cheering you up. And remote school doesn't give you as much opportunity for that. We're going to talk more about that one in our webinar next week. The fifth one, what we know and believe about our students individually, culturally, developmentally informs our expectations, reactions, and attitudes about those students. I want you to think about maybe a silver lining that has gone along with remote school. Think about some things you may have learned about your students now, getting into their homes remotely or driving past their house to drop off materials. Things that maybe you've learned in this crisis of a health epidemic that you may not have learned otherwise. I do think with the way we've had to teach school, we've had a lot of empathy for the challenges that different families have, but we also have learned a lot about the supports that our kids have at home too. And the last one, partnering with families, knowing them and valuing their contributions is as important as knowing the children we teach. With remote school, it's impossible to not be partnering with families. We realize that the home is the school, and we need to make sure we make those positive connections. I'm going to pause a minute for reflection right now for you. These are the core beliefs and guiding principles that guide the work of responsive classroom. I want you now to think about how this core belief and these guiding principles are present in either your remote school or your in-person school when you return to school. On your piece of paper, and I'm not sure how well you can see this, but make a T-chart. And then one side of the T-chart put remote school. And the other side of the T-chart put in school or school building, because they're both still school. And I'm going to give you a full minute of reflecting right now on your own. But either under remote school or in school, jot down an idea of how the core beliefs or guiding principles right now are present. So I'm going to jot down under remote school that principle number 6, partnering with families, has really shown up in the work that I've been connecting with people that are doing in schools, especially with our students who were having the most challenges with administrative teams and social services teams actually connecting with every family at home. So I'm going to be silent for a minute and give you a time to reflect. So what does this look like? What does responsive classroom look like? I've shared those core beliefs and guiding principles with you. You've done a little bit of reflecting on them. In the responsive classroom approach, those core beliefs and guiding principles are combined with responsive classroom teaching practices. We have researched teaching practices for K-8 classrooms, and I have to say I know a number of schools take them down to preschool and some are trying to use them even above 8th grade, but they're researched for K-8 classrooms. And then when we combine those core beliefs and practices together with our guiding principles, it results in this picture on the right. Safe, challenging, joyful, engaging classrooms. And we do that by following, if you look around the circle, we call those the 4 domains of responsive classroom. So with responsive classroom, we're designing classrooms that have engaging academics, at the same time building positive community, at the same time having student empowered effective management, while we're also making sure we have developmentally and culturally responsive teaching practices. They're all happening at the same time. Some of those practices that we use more intentionally focus on one or more of the domains, but they're only successful if we use them all. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that would look like both in our remote school and our in-person school when it comes to the idea of having practices that support self-discipline with social and emotional learning. Why don't you take a look at this scenario? This is from a book, Teaching Self-Discipline. Read the scenario that's in front of you. You might have to shrink if you have a thumbnail of a picture up there. Read it in front of you and consider the student Ethan and what social and emotional skills Ethan needs to be successful in this learning opportunity. So as you take a look at that, I'm kind of guessing these kind of situations are going on at home remote school right now too, with families all sharing the same materials. But if we think about what Ethan needed to be successful, first of all, he and Chloe and maybe some other students were cooperating to use the same materials to do individual projects. If you know, as an educator, that can pose some problems sometimes. He also was responsible to the rules and knew that the rules were that you needed to respect people's things. So thinking of those rules, that stopped him from taking the stencil that he wanted. That also involved some self-control. You had to do kind of some self-talk to say, yes, I can't do that because that's not the rule and it could make Chloe feel upset. And yes, when he's thinking about Chloe's feelings, he's having empathy. And finally, when she does come back and he uses assertion to ask for if he can have the stencil when she comes back, that practices that 5th social and emotional skill. In the responsive classroom approach, we believe that those social and emotional skills are so important. They're part of what we do for directly teaching students. But we also believe it's important that we teach those skills. The same kind of idea when we sent teachers on their way to do remote school in the middle of March. We didn't just say, go have a great time, see if you can figure this out and let them on their own. We anticipated there's going to be the ones that struggle and I'm going to hear more from them. I'm going to make sure I need to reach out to them every day. I might have to partner them up to be successful. And I also knew that there were certain skills that every teacher needed to be successful with remote learning. I had to set some expectations. So if I'm going to send them on their way to be successful, there had to be clear expectations. That's what it looks like in the responsive classroom approach. I'm going to take a look at this. So in the responsive classroom approach, when it comes to teaching social emotional skills, we talk about them as teaching discipline. Now, sometimes when people hear the word discipline, they envision something negative. Oh, that student needs more discipline, or they're being sent home because they have a discipline problem or sent to the office, or I need to talk to that parent about their discipline. But the word discipline actually comes from a Latin word that means to learn. So in the responsive classroom approach, we view discipline as a time to learn. And when we think of it that way, we see that is all of our responsibility to help teach students discipline. It made me think of an example that somebody shared and said, well, I think of discipline as the road to success. And I kind of said, well, what do you mean by that? She says, well, think about it. A disciplined pianist, a disciplined driver, they're all successful. And how did they get there? So we thought about it for a little bit. And yeah, to be a disciplined pianist, you need to be taught. You need to have a piano teacher that believes in you, that you can go from plunking out keys to being able to perform. If you're a disciplined driver, you have somebody with you that along the way taught you all the rules to safety. But then when you're on your own for playing the piano or for driving, you also have self-discipline. You're able to move on your own and be successful. So not only do we believe discipline can be taught, we also believe that discipline can be learned by every learner. It's not just that those social emotional skills are for that small group that needs some extra instruction. Just like you didn't pull a group aside to say, now you're going to be the teachers that need this extra remote school experience because I know you're going to struggle. We gave the same information to all teachers to help them be successful. And we kind of eagerly, I would say, anticipated that there were going to be some problems. We knew that there's going to be somebody that's going to have some struggles. Same thing we do in the classroom and in the school. We set up kids with all the skills they need to be successful with social emotional learning. But we anticipate there's going to be some problems. And then this is where we, as leaders, support staff to be empowered to help students with that. Right now, some of those discipline concerns that I checked with educators that are out there in the world saying, you know, what are the biggest struggles? To be honest right now, a lot of people said kids just checking out. That they're done with, like, they don't even want to play with the iPad anymore. It's become, you know, something they don't want to do. And they kind of long for that personal connection. One fifth grade teacher that I talked to said, she said, I had to really start retooling how I connected with kids on the Zoom format because a lot of them just didn't want to be there. So I had to make it fun. But then through that fun, I could teach them some skills. So one of the things that she did to get them connected right away is she starts every day when they log on with the would you rather question. Would you rather swim in a pool or swim in a lake? And they have to log in as to which one they would do. And now she's got them in. From the content that she's gathering, then she can build her learning. You know, they're not excited about learning math, but they are excited to see who likes swimming in a pool and swimming in a lake in comparison. She took that same information then and she put it on a slide so that the students could see who wants to swim in a pool and who wants to swim in a lake. She had 20 students in front of her. She had 17 answers. So that meant 3 of the students didn't respond, hadn't included. And so she used that as an example. So think about in our remote learning, we're all responsible for our part in this. And because 3 of you didn't respond, we don't really know how everybody in the school, how everybody in our class here feels about swimming. So you need to make a commitment. And then she had all 20 pieces of data that she needed. Then she took the data and said, okay, 7 of you prefer lake and 13 of you prefer pool. Now what's the percentage? So now she was able to engage them through this way that they were checking out with something more positive. That's what we do when we teach discipline in the responsive classroom approach. If we're going to teach social emotional skills in the responsive classroom approach, it's connected to something they're interested in. I had a background as a speech and language clinician, and I also worked as an able learner teacher. And I remember back then, before I knew this approach, trying to teach social emotional skills with a little poster. Look at the boy and the girl on the slide. What can you see about their emotions? What does the little boy look like he's going to do? That wasn't the best way to teach those social emotional skills. Instead, we played a game together and talked about turn taking, and talked about frustration, and talked about being a good sport, because that's how discipline was going to be taught and how discipline was going to be learned. When we think of discipline and social emotional learning, when we get back in our in-person school, a lot of times we think of discipline as something separate from learning. Oh, discipline takes away from the learning. So discipline maybe becomes something that a child's pulled out of the room to deal with, or I meet with them during recess, or I have to talk to their parents about, because that's discipline. And social emotional learning becomes that happy time when we talk about those skills that we're working on and building that together. But when you think about it, the social emotional skills that kids need to be disciplined, they need to apply right away in the learning that they're in, with caring adults that support them. Instead of this divide that's between social emotional learning and discipline, we want to join them together. And when we join them together, think about what that could look like. In the responsive classroom approach, I'm just going to paint a picture of some of the things that we do to connect them together so you can see that. Through one of the ways we do that through social emotional learning is we anticipate that there's going to be places that are going to be hard. So I'm just going to use an example right now in remote learning. One of the teachers said, I had so many kids that were just clicking buttons and they didn't know how to mute themselves, and it was driving me crazy. So she anticipated that being a problem, and she made, and that's why I stole her idea, she made flashcards for all the buttons that students would be. So she could just give a visual cue rather than having to keep interrupting. She was teaching self-control and self-discipline without getting frustrated. Another thing is through teacher language. One way through teacher language that we try to change up a little bit is often teacher language is corrective when it comes to concerns with discipline. But if we can use our teacher language to envision success or to reinforce the positive behavior that we notice, we get a completely different result because we're showing kids we have faith in them. And remember, our goal is to be self-disciplined. So if when everybody comes on to a remote classroom and I see everybody's face there, I might say, wow, I can tell this feels very respectful today because I see that you're all smiling and your faces are in the screen. So ways to say an envisioning comment, or after we've done an activity to really make a comment, I really noticed that you use self-control to keep your comments short so that everybody's voice can be heard in the share. We use our teacher language. We might use a strategy called interactive modeling, where we show what it is that we expect kids to do. We don't assume they know how to stand in a line. We don't assume they know how to get their lunch in the cafeteria. We model how to do that, and then we support them in being successful. There's another strategy called a role play. And role plays are really valuable tool for practicing some of those sticky situations where they apply their social emotional learning skills. Some teachers use role play to have kids practice what it's gonna be like on the playground, because oftentimes that's when a teacher might get that much needed lunch break. They're on the playground with someone else, but that's where they have probably the most application of their social emotional skills. So let's take a minute now and look at these again, and we're going to start thinking about how responsive classroom discipline can be that tool for social emotional learning. Here are those competencies, and I'm going to pause for a minute. I want you to just think about how these competencies are something that are important for the group of students that you work with the most closely. Maybe you're in the present mind, you're thinking about your remote classrooms. Or maybe you're thinking ahead, well, I'm always a kindergarten teacher. This is what my kindergartners really struggle with. Take a look at those competencies and make a picture in your mind. I have to laugh while I'm looking at this right now, but my mind is kind of going to the adults that we work with who are in remote learning, and probably a lot of you right now that are in that too. That a lot of it was impacted by that mindset. Like, I can do this or I can't do this, in that sense that there was some success with it. And then the other thing is some of those learning strategies. I have a feeling that some people have definitely reached out to other family members, whether it's their own children to help them be successful with technology, or their spouses or partners, whatever it takes. I know I was talking online with our tech guy from Responsive Classroom yesterday and saying, I'm looking forward to my husband being home because he's the one that helped me figure out this whole internet problem I'm having. But we lean on other people, and that is a learning strategy that we support. So let's take a look at the definition of responsive classroom discipline. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. When I put the slide up, you're going to start reading it to yourself. And we're going to do a strategy called one word around. And this is going to be our first interactive learning structure where you're going to go into a breakout room. In one word around, you're going to share one word or short phrase. Sometimes we can't pick just one word that connects with you from the definition of responsive classroom discipline. So as you read it on the next slide, jot down a word that connects with you, and then think about the why this word. So I'll give you time to read, and sometimes it helps to jot that word down so that when you get in your group, you'll have a reminder of what the word is. Here's your definition. You're going to enter into a breakout room. And if you're familiar with Zoom breakout rooms, it kind of feels like the old Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty. You're going to leave here and you're all of a sudden going to be in a room with a screen with probably in this case, we're going to have about 4 or 5 other people. When you're in the room, you'll see everybody's first names are going to be listed underneath their picture. And whoever's name is first in the alphabet by first name is going to be the one who shares first. Then just go around the screen in alphabetic order by first name. So if there's any Abby's or Angela's out there, expect to be the one who goes first. When you begin to share your one word, do that cocktail party introduction. Hi, my name is Margie. I'm a consulting teacher from Wisconsin. My one word is, I'm just going to say Scooby-Doo. But at that point, don't say why you picked that word. Just say your word. Go around till everybody gets a chance to share. And then after everyone said their word, talk about what you noticed about the words. Get into a conversation about, wow, why did these words stick out to us? Why did we pick those? You might find you had the same words or some different words. I'm going to give you 4 minutes for this breakout, and I'm going to tell you you're going to get a 1-minute warning. It'll show up on the screen as a 1-minute warning. And you can stay in the group until your minute ends. You'll see it counting down, and you'll be zoomed back in just like, again, Star Trek, beam me up. If you want to return before that, you can do that at any time too. Right now, you're all unmuted. So when you get into your breakout room, be sure to click on your red microphone when it's your turn to talk. And you're a small enough group, you might all want to have yours unmiked if you want to. And do be prepared, hopefully, that you can share. If you, I have a co-host that's helping me, and if we notice that your group is like too small, we might shuffle you around. So if you feel like you're moving in the middle of one, we want groups to at least be 3 or 4 people so you have a rich discussion. So yeah, we're being a little Star Trekky there. Some of you didn't get off the spaceship Enterprise, so sorry about that. And I don't even know if the most current Star Trek shows even have Beam Me Up Scotty anymore, but it's an age thing, I think.
Oh, they still have transporters.
Oh, do they? That's good. Now you made me feel better. Good. So I know that those shares can go really fast, but I hope it was a quick way to meet a few other people and get a chance to stop listening to me and hear some other content. So what does a responsive classroom discipline approach look like? These are the characteristics of responsive classroom discipline. My computer will let my screen not freeze. Whoops. So listen to these characteristics. I'm gonna do some connection to remote school, but also when we get in school. So generally the characteristics of responsive classroom discipline is it's a kind and firm approach so that students feel safe and they feel respected. Sometimes responsive classroom, people think that it's all roses and sunshine, that we're not clear or direct with kids, but that firmness and direction helps build that safety. We also really attend to the student needs of belonging and significance. Much behavior is driven by our human needs. And many times that need is for students to have a sense of significance, to be seen. They know they can be seen by us right away when they misbehave. So can we find ways to let them know that we see them and respect them when they're doing the right thing as well? And it's truly that sense of community and belonging as well. Students long to belong. And I have a feeling when they finally return to school that they're going to even have a deeper sense of that need and appreciation for belonging. When we talk about responsive classroom, the next bullet is about it being a long-term approach to helping kids develop self-control, to helping them have self-discipline. One of our founders made the comment one time that really stuck with me. He said, responsive classroom isn't a quick fix, it's a deep fix. That deepness comes from within our students, that we want them to have those skills to have that self-control and that self-discipline. We teach those social emotional skills throughout the day. They're built in, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide that we're going to talk about. And then we also help kids to use what we've taught them, use their personal power in positive ways. From the moment they walk into school, we help empower them to have the responsibility. Sometimes I say we take the learning away from kids. We solve their problems for them. When we solve their problems for them, it shows that we don't believe that they can solve their problems. And that's where that learning and that deep fix occurs. I'm going to come back to the slide about the social emotional competencies. What I want you to do right now is to jot down on a piece of paper the 5 social skills you see in front of you right now. So I don't know if you can see this on my screen, but I wrote down the letters CARES. Yes, it spells the acronym CARES. These 5 researched social skills are the heart of our work when we're teaching social emotional learning. Yes, there are other social emotional competencies, but these are the ones that we intentionally teach to students every day throughout the day. I'm going to share with you definitions of what each of them are, and then some examples of in-person and remote learning. And what I'm going to do is pause after I talk about each one for you to jot down where you see this social skill being something that shows up in your school, whether it's remote school or in-person school. So you have an example that sticks with you. Now be prepared, because we're going to enter into another breakout room where you're going to share your examples with others. So get a chance to share those as well. I'm going to give just a quick warning though about breakout rooms. If the breakout rooms aren't going to include everybody, which I noticed happened this last time, I might bring you back more quickly, because we had quite a number of you that didn't get zoomed into one. So we'll see. Our number now is 194. So hopefully that will work for everybody to get into a breakout room. So the first one, cooperation. Cooperation is a familiar word to a lot of us, but it isn't always a word that students have a clear meaning for. When students use cooperation, it's when they establish new relationships, they maintain positive relationships, they can add friendships, they can have the skills to avoid social isolation. When they're using cooperation, they can resolve conflicts, accept differences. They can also see themselves as a contributing member of their school and classroom community, and they work productively for the good of all. So a cooperation in our school setting might look like students cooperating to play ball games on the playground during recess time. That might look like cooperation. Cooperation in a home setting Might be engaging kids in a conversation. Who is somebody you cooperated with? You might be cooperating a lot more with your brothers and sisters to share resources that you have. And also to decide who's going to play what game or how we're going to decide who gets to pick. Take a minute right now, and I'm not going to give you a full minute. Count about 30 seconds in my head. Take about 30 seconds to jot down how cooperation is present as a social emotional skill in either your remote school or your in-person school. And finish your last thought. The competency of assertiveness or assertion is a student's ability to take initiative, to stand up for their own ideas, to do that without being hurtful or excluding and demeaning people and manipulating them. It's also in a way that they help others succeed, and they recognize that they have the power to be individual selves, separate from others in other circumstances. I think that especially for our young adolescents, their assertiveness to peer pressure is really an important skill to teach. Assertiveness in the school setting takes place when we work on our morning meeting or our activities that we do, and students have to offer up a thought that they want to share. Sometimes it takes a lot of assertiveness to come up with an idea that they want to share with others. We might talk about that at home when you're in your remote learning situation, is when it comes to trying to solve a problem with your learning at home. I'm as the teacher, I'm not there to help you. How can you be assertive and get your help from somebody at your home? Again, take about 30 seconds, jot down your example of assertiveness and when assertiveness is used in your school or your home learning. Our third competency is responsibility. Responsibility seems like it's the big one, that it shows up so much. But a lot of students don't know those skills of responsibility to be taught them. When we think about responsibility is a student's ability to motivate themselves, to take action, to follow through on expectations, even to define a problem and consider ahead the consequences, and then take responsibility for the consequences that come of that, or also to provide a solution. I feel like responsibility is one that we talk about a lot in the school, but yet sometimes I think we take away responsibility, that we don't want kids to feel the consequences that they're dealing with. Sometimes I would say when students would come to the office to solve a problem with me, and I just use the words, well, what part of that problem were you responsible for? And that kind of leads to the discussion, well, what could you do next time so that problem doesn't happen? Because you're responsible for what you do. Right now, this seems to be an area that's really a struggle for remote learning. And a lot of times I'm hearing people say, well, the kids just aren't responsible, or the parents aren't responsible. We don't know what the responsibilities are that everybody's dealing with for all these unique situations, but it'd be a great word just to talk about. You know, who's in your home? What are their responsibilities? What are your responsibilities? Now think about, if your mom's responsibility is to make the meals, what would happen in your house if she wasn't responsible, if she didn't follow through with her responsibilities? I don't know if that's a safe one to talk about, but talk about how our world is based on being responsible and the success with it. Take a minute right now again to think about how responsibility is a competency students are using either now or when they return to school. And there might be somebody I'm hearing might need a mute if you unmuted yourself. Empathy is a social emotional skill. I think that's so important to our world. In fact, there's a book that I'm reading that the whole book is about empathy and the power that it has in our human relationships. Empathy is that ability for students to recognize and understand another person's feelings, their state of mind and their emotion, and to be receptive to new ideas and new perspectives. It's also their ability to value differences and to accept and value diversity, to have concern over others' welfare. And even when that concern may not benefit them at all. I think right now the world lessons about this global pandemic have opened up a lot of our eyes to the empathy of different situations that people are going through. I think being in parents' homes with a remote learning has created a lot of empathy on our part. So using current events as an opportunity to teach empathy is a big piece. I think it's part of citizenship. And when we're in school, a lot of times teachers have found empathy is something that they connect a lot with in literature. So they teach about empathy as they talk about characters in a different way, trying to get that idea of different perspectives. Again, take 30 seconds to jot down how empathy is a skill that's taught, either in remote school or in person. The last social and emotional competency is self-control. And when we think about self-control is the ability to recognize and to regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And it's also the ability to be successful in the moment and even to change the direction you're in into a positive trajectory. Self-control during remote learning takes on a whole different look than when it looks like in school. I find that even as myself as a participant in a remote learning situation, I have a different level of self-talk in my brain to stay engaged. And that's something we can teach students because that's probably a way that they're going to be interacting a lot in the future. The other way that self-control is taught in our classrooms is a lot of times I see it when teachers teach routines to students. Yes, you have your markers in front of you right now in our common bin. And that can be really tempting for you to use those markers when we do some learning today. When it's time to use those markers, I will tell you how we're going to use them. But in the meantime, show me how you're going to have self-control so that you're not using the markers. So anticipating struggles that they're going to have, teaching them. And this is also where they do some of that self-talk. So what do you tell yourself when you're really tempted to use something and you're keeping yourself back from doing it? Remember before when I talked about that we use our teacher language to teach these? These are things we don't just teach them, we recognize them. So if when we see students using self-control, we might say, well, I really noticed you use self-control right now when I can tell that your baby brother's face was coming in the screen and you just kind of gently put your hand up to keep him out of the picture. So ways that we can teach it by recognizing it. Okay, take 30 more seconds to jot down your examples of self-control. In the meantime, I'm going to try to get you ready for being in breakout rooms one more time. So as you're looking at the examples that you just connected, and again, they were connections either with remote learning or in school learning, you're now going to move into, and I'm going to take me back out of this example. I'll get to that example after we get back. But you're going to go into your breakout rooms and you're going to share your examples in a similar way as you shared your one word around. How this is going to work is when you get into your breakout room, you'll be in a group of 4 or 5 people. Do that same cocktail party introduction, starting with the person whose letter begins the first letter of your name, would be first in alphabetical order, and go around the circle again until everybody in alphabetical order gets to share. When it's your turn to share, introduce yourself and then pick one of the CARE social skills and share your example. So you might say, I'm Margie Dorhorst. I'm a consulting teacher from Wisconsin. I picked assertiveness as a skill that my students used at my school and will be using at my school when they have to share during the morning announcements, when I have a few of them come down and make those morning announcements. Next person. After each of you share, then you'll have a little bit of time to discuss about how these are some social skills that can be taught in your school. Maybe some of you are already doing this really well, or maybe you are anchoring this on something else that you already do. Any questions before I send you off? You'd have to unmute to ask them. Well, I'm glad that we have so many of you back. I think we lost a few people. And again, as we're trying to have these be as engaging as possible with such a large group, we had a cutoff at 100 and then we increased it to allow everybody in. So that might be part of our problem today because we're about 200 people participated today. So I'm sorry if you didn't get a chance to share. I think the breakout groups as a strategy on a Zoom interface are so important for you to connect with others. So I appreciate those of you that got a chance to share, and definitely next week we'll work out the bugs before we continue with this as well. We only have about 10 more minutes of our webinar today, and I want to give you some time to really think and plan. So what I'm going to do is, as we wrap up our webinar, I want to paint a picture of what teaching those social emotional skills looks like in the responsive classroom with a discipline framework. And then you're going to have time to look at your notes and put together your vision of how you want to take this information back with you, either to use now or in the next school year. So the responsive classroom discipline framework has, the main part of it is intentionally creating a safe and predictable learning environment. I kind of laughed and say, because that's exactly what we're not doing in the school setting we're in now. But we're trying to do that as much as possible. The example that I shared with the teacher, Bree, that I was talking about, she said she realized her kids need a routine. They needed to have those routine morning meetings every day, no matter what. And even the routine of having the would you rather question every day was part of what they needed to help them to be successful right now. In the responsive classroom, we start every day with a morning meeting at the elementary level. We have a daily advisory at the middle school level and build in that responsive advisory meeting. We have practices that are common throughout the school. We even use a common signal. Oftentimes you'll see in a school using a chime as a way, and I'll ring it, but it'll drive you crazy, as a way to get attention so that all students throughout the school know that when we get your attention, we're doing it respectfully. That's our responsive classroom discipline. That's a lot of what we do. It's a proactive. I think about it when I think of an example of being a firefighter. If you're a firefighter, you want to spend most of your time being a fire preventer. Our school used to be right next door to the firehouse. And when we'd see the firemen were so often at the firehouse, they didn't leave, which I thought was a good thing, but you wondered what they do. So of course, when they'd come over to our school and visit, we said, what do you do all day? They work on fire prevention. And when we think about that, that's what we do when we practice and create those safe and predictable learning environments. We also do that by preventing off-task behavior and misbehavior. I did a little bit of that today. I had some guidelines for us to be successful. I explained some tools. I had empathy for you about how hard 90 minutes could be. And then I also realized that we're in a challenging time. So when I can, to try to be there for you, even pausing on a Zoom format can help prevent some of that off-task behavior. We tend to not do that when we're teaching as well. We tend to not want to stop. We keep talking and filling this space. Pausing, having eye contact, giving a visual cue are all ways that we can prevent off-task and misbehavior. We expect there to be behavior issues at times, just like the firefighters ready to go when they're ready to put out a fire. But you know those firefighters, they'd much rather go to a fire that's a small blaze, a small fire versus when it turns into a roaring inferno. In the responsive classroom, we try to respond to small behaviors before they turn into big behaviors. Sometimes we do that by attending to small things with a visual cue. Or we might do that with, just a look or a word. And that helps students get back on track right away. An analogy I heard about that was about going to a youth basketball game. I spent a lot of time as a mom of 3 kids, spending time on bleachers, going to basketball games. And I loved the basketball games that were well reffed. The rules were clear, the whistle was blowing, team members were taken out if there was a mistake and put right back in. But the game felt positive, safe, and fair. It's those games that were poorly reffed, where kids ended up taking advantage of the lax rules, I guess, hurting each other, not knowing if this time they're going to get caught at a rule or not this time. Just that frustration. It got children upset, parents upset, and the coaches would get frustrated in that kind of thing. And you'd leave those games, even if they won, not feeling good about them. The analogy somebody gave for me is in the responsive classroom, when the toe is on the line, it's over the line. We don't argue about whether that was a behavior that wasn't okay or not. We try to get the toe back in the line and get students right back into the game of learning. So we respond to that off-task behavior and we make sure we get kids on track right away. We have a number of tools for solving chronic behavior problems. Think about that with all of your teachers going into remote learning. You knew there were going to be some people that needed some support because this was going to be really hard. You were prepared to have those supports. Responsive classroom, we're prepared for those more ongoing difficult behaviors. There's a book called Solving Thorny Behavior Problems that has a lot of resources. And I'll share 2 other books that I've used today that also have some resources. And finally, many students have outbursts these days and kind of that fight or flight or freeze response that is catching educators around the country kind of off guard at times. Unrealistic responses to things that we wouldn't think would be an issue. And we're realizing that a lot of that's impacted by a history of trauma or of toxic stress. Even though this is a worldwide pandemic, all of our kids right now are going through some amount of stress in this unusual time. So we want to prepare them and be expected of them by having routines in place for helping calm students when they're upset. Places for kids to calm, words for kids to calm themselves with, helping teach kids about their emotions so that they can respond to their emotions safely and respectfully without turning into unsafe behaviors. So that's what responsive classroom discipline looks like. And it's along the way teaching all those social emotional skills. What might this mean for you going forward? Got 2 reflection questions I want you to take a look at. I'll move this one more slide in. Here's the first question. How do you see what you've learned today, the responsive classroom approach to discipline? How do you see it being used to empower students to develop self-discipline? What are some takeaways that you can take from today? You can look at your notes, the idea you had about the CARE social skills, the ideas of building self-discipline. And then the next question is, what impact would that empowerment have on your remote school community and your in-school community? I'm going to be quiet for 45 seconds to give you time to reflect and look at your notes and jot down a thought. I want to thank all of you so much for being part of this webinar today. Staying engaged for 90 minutes and being part of a learning environment where we have people literally from around the country. The resources I promised I would share with you today that are used, one of our books, Teaching Self-Discipline, has a lot of the content I talked about today. And this is designed for elementary schools. And I'd call it like its sister or brother book, Seeing the Good in Students. It's the responsive classroom approach to middle school discipline. Both are great resources available from our bookstore. My passion for leaders is strong, and there's 2 more webinars. One that'll be offered, it was advertised, it's going to be offered next week, and it's on the power of leading adults. And then the following week, we'll have 1 more, and it'll be about engaging adults. If you want to stay connected beyond this, we have a number of social media sites, and I really appreciate those people that go on there and post their own ideas and examples. I think it just shows the power of this work in schools at all different levels and in all different formats around the country. And I just want to say and thank you from the bottom of my heart for you being here, all the work that you're doing for students, and taking these 90 minutes to be here and learn this information. I wish you the best as you move on from here. And I'll stay on in case anybody wants to ask any additional questions. Feel free to unmute and just ask those questions. You also, I'm going to open up that